Don't even bother, you'll fail. That's what Cameron Brooks heard from his math teacher the day he was called to the board. A 15-year-old black boy, wearing a wrinkled striped shirt and sneakers, still wet from his janitor shift, was expected to fail publicly. What happened next didn't just silence a room, it shattered a stereotype. This is the story of how one student, overlooked and underestimated, used math to break through a wall built by generations of bias. It's not just about numbers, it's about identity, dignity, and defiance. As Malcolm X once said, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. If this story moves you, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and hit subscribe. This is more than a video. This is where truth gets told, one story at a time. At just 15 years old, Cameron Brooks knew how to disappear in a crowd. After all, being invisible had become a skill, one he'd perfected ever since his mother transferred him to Franklin High School. It wasn't his grades or his behavior that made him an outsider. It was the neighborhood he came from, the color of his skin, and the quiet way he kept to himself. His mom, a hard-working janitor who cleaned hospital floors during the night shift, had moved them across the city to chase a better life. But better didn't come easy. Franklin High looked promising on paper: good math scores, a clean campus, and teachers with Ivy League degrees. But from the moment Cameron stepped through the front doors, he knew something was off. No one said anything outright, but he felt it. The way teachers glanced past him when asking questions, the way students looked him over like he didn't belong. They'd never say it out loud, but Cameron didn't need them to. He could hear it in the silence. His math teacher, Mr. Halverson, was the kind of man who believed in order and pedigree. Silver-haired, straight-backed, and always in a starched white shirt, he ran his classroom like a courtroom. No nonsense, no second chances. He had a soft spot for the front-row kids, the ones with polished shoes, quiet confidence, and parents who'd met him during orientation. Cameron, who sat in the back and rarely spoke, was a name he barely remembered. That didn't stop Cameron from showing up every day. He did his work, turned in assignments on time, and even raised his hand when he knew the answer. But Mr. Halverson never called on him. Not once. It was as if Cameron didn't exist, and when he did get noticed, it was always with that same patronizing tone, like he was being humored, not taken seriously. At night, while most kids relaxed or played video games, Cameron cleaned classrooms at the very school that dismissed him by day. His mom had pulled strings to get him the job, part-time janitorial work, to help cover rent. He didn't mind. The quiet after-hours halls were peaceful, and in a small storage room, tucked between the science wing and the boiler room, he had something of his own. A fold-out table, a flickering overhead light, and stacks of old math textbooks he found in the school's discard pile. There, away from the judgmental eyes and forced smiles, Cameron thrived. He solved equations most of his classmates couldn't dream of. He studied concepts that didn't appear in the standard curriculum. He wasn't chasing grades. He was chasing truth. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't care where you lived or what you looked like. In that supply closet, Cameron wasn't invisible. He was unstoppable. One rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. Mr. Halverson entered class with a tight expression and announced they had a guest, Dr. Lisa Romero, a representative from the National Math Scholars Program. She stood quietly in the back, clipboard in hand, as students exchanged nervous glances. Then came the moment. "Cameron," Mr. Halverson said, his voice dry, casual in a way that felt forced, "why don't you come up and solve this?" He gestured toward the board where he had written an equation, long, complex, filled with variables and nested fractions. It wasn't high school math. It wasn't even AP level. This was something from a college seminar. The class went silent. Cameron froze for a second. He could feel the weight of their stares, the smirks, the doubt, but then he stood up, walked slowly to the board, and picked up the chalk. His heart was pounding. His palms were slick, but his mind focused. He broke the problem down line by line, Every mark he made was deliberate. No guessing. No hesitation. He could feel the room shifting. The whispers stopped. Even Dr. Romero leaned in, curious. When he finished, Cameron capped the chalk, turned to Mr. Halverson, and simply said, "That should be correct." There was a pause. Mr. Halverson's lips tightened. "Lucky guess?" Cameron didn't flinch. "There's no luck in math. It's either right or it's not." Dr. Romero spoke then, her voice cutting clean through the tension. "That wasn't luck. That was exceptional." And just like that, the boy no one noticed had become the one no one could ignore. Cameron didn't sleep much that night. The image of Mr. Halverson's stunned face replayed in his mind like a movie on loop. Not because he wanted revenge, but because for the first time, someone had seen him for who he really was. Dr. Romero had stayed after class, briefly shaking his hand before leaving with only 5 words, "We'll be in touch, Cameron." The next morning, the whispers started. In the hallway, at lunch, even in the locker room where he never really belonged. "He's the one who solved it," someone said. "The janitor? Seriously?" another muttered. Cameron kept his head down, pretending not to hear. But he felt every word. Suddenly, the boy who had mastered the art of being invisible was now the subject of every conversation. It wasn't all admiration. Some students looked at him with surprise, others with disbelief, and a few with quiet contempt, especially those who had always believed they were smarter, more deserving. But no one's reaction stung more than Mr. Halverson's. The next few days in math class felt colder than ever. The teacher barely looked at Cameron, skipped over him during discussions, and no longer acknowledged his raised hand. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. After school, Cameron continued working his janitor shift. He emptied trash cans, wiped whiteboards, and vacuumed carpets. But something was different now. He wasn't just cleaning. He was preparing. Dr. Romero had emailed him an official invitation to take the placement exam for the National Math Scholars Program. 1 week to prepare. 1 shot. If he passed, he'd receive a full scholarship and access to top-tier mentorship. No more supply closet studying. No more being overlooked. So he doubled down. Every evening, after finishing his shift, Cameron returned to that small storage room. He brought an old digital watch to time himself on problem sets. He borrowed library books far beyond his grade level. He even taped notes to the wall, equations, theorems, logic puzzles, until the closet looked like a private war room. His mother noticed the change too. One night she knocked gently on the closet door, holding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "You can't do it all on an empty stomach," she said with a tired smile. "I'm proud of you, baby." Cameron looked up from his notes, eyes red from strain. "What if I mess it up? What if I don't belong?" She sat beside him on an overturned paint bucket. "Cameron, people have been underestimating folks like us for generations. Doesn't mean they're right. You just make sure you know who you are. That's all that matters." The night before the exam, it rained hard. Thunder shook the windows of their apartment, and water leaked from the corner of his bedroom ceiling into a cooking pot they kept there for storms. Cameron sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers. Every formula he reviewed, every theorem he recited out loud, felt like he was rewriting a story that had been told about him for too long. A story that said black boys from working-class neighborhoods couldn't be brilliant, that they didn't belong in advanced classrooms, or elite programs, or places where futures were built. By the time dawn broke, he was exhausted, but ready. The test was held in Franklin High's main auditorium, a place Cameron had only ever entered to clean the floors. Now he stood at the entrance, wearing the only button-down shirt he owned, and shoes that still squeaked when he walked. Rows of students, teachers, and administrators filled the room. Even Mr. Halverson sat in the front row, arms crossed. Dr. Romero greeted him warmly, then gestured to a whiteboard already covered with an enormous problem, far more complex than anything he had seen in school. Cameron felt his stomach twist, but he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, picked up the marker, and began. The room faded away. There was no noise, no movement, just him and the math. He didn't rush. He didn't freeze. He worked the problem methodically, checking each step as he went. About halfway through, the murmurs started. By the end, the auditorium was silent. Cameron capped the marker and stepped back. Dr. Romero stood slowly, scanning the board. "Correct," she said. "And exceptional." For a long moment, no one said a word. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Then more, until the room was filled with applause. Mr. Halverson didn't clap. He didn't even blink. But Cameron didn't need his approval anymore. He walked off the stage, not with pride, but with peace, because he had finally claimed what was his. Not just a scholarship, but a place. Cameron thought things would change after the test. In a way they did, but not how he expected. For the rest of that week, the students at Franklin High treated him differently. Some offered high fives in the hallway. A few of the kids who'd never spoken to him before now asked him for help with homework. Jason Green, a junior who had once laughed when Cameron walked into advanced math class, suddenly sat next to him and said, "Man, you're like a walking calculator." It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something. The teachers, though, they stayed quiet, especially Mr. Halverson. He never mentioned the test again. No congratulations. No acknowledgement. He ran the class as if nothing had happened. The chalk still clicked against the board. Assignments were still handed out on time, and Cameron still sat in the back row. Only now, his hand wasn't ignored. When he answered, Mr. Halverson simply nodded, expression unreadable. The strangest part? Cameron didn't care. Not anymore. He had spent too long trying to earn a nod from someone who had never planned to give it. What did matter was the letter that came the following Monday. It was thick, official. The envelope had his name in embossed letters across the front. Cameron held it for a full minute before opening it. Inside, a full scholarship offer to the National Math Scholars Program. Travel, housing, tuition, mentorship covered. It didn't feel real. His mom cried when she saw it. She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered. "I always knew you would." That night, they celebrated with microwaved pizza and 2 cans of ginger ale. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like victory. And yet, the more the news spread, the more Cameron noticed a shift in the air. Not all the attention was positive. Some kids started calling him the scholarship boy, not as a compliment, but as if his success was a fluke. A few parents complained at a PTA meeting, asking why an underperforming student from outside the district had been given such an opportunity. Rumors started to swirl that he'd cheated, that Dr. Romero had chosen him out of pity, that it was all for publicity. Cameron heard it all, sometimes in whispers, as he walked past, sometimes loud enough to make sure he caught every word. One afternoon he passed Mr. Halverson in the hallway. The teacher stopped him. "You're headed to the program," he said. "That's quite a step." "Yes, sir," Cameron replied. "I just hope you're ready. Out there, it's a whole different game. They don't hand out second chances." Cameron nodded. "Good thing I won't need one." It wasn't bravado. It was truth. He'd already come farther than anyone thought he would, and he wasn't finished yet. The next month moved fast. Cameron spent his days finishing final exams and wrapping up his janitor shifts. Nights were filled with paperwork, travel forms, and Zoom meetings with program coordinators. His room turned into a command center, papers stacked high, his old calculator buzzing under the weight of constant use. But the real preparation wasn't academic, it was mental, because deep down, Cameron knew he'd be walking into rooms where no one looked like him, where his presence would be questioned before he ever opened his mouth. He'd experienced it at Franklin. He'd seen it in Mr. Halverson's smirk, in the way some students rolled their eyes when he spoke. This next chapter would be more of the same, just with better buildings and bigger stakes. The night before he left for orientation, Cameron stood outside his apartment building. The sky was clear, stars visible between the gaps of streetlights. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He wasn't scared. He was ready. The next morning, he boarded the train with one suitcase and a worn-out backpack. His mom waved from the platform. smiling through tears. "You keep being you," she called out, as the train pulled away. At the orientation center, Cameron stepped into a room filled with brilliant minds from all over the country. Most wore button-ups, polos, shoes that looked expensive. Cameron wore the same striped shirt he'd solved that impossible equation in. It reminded him of who he was, and how far he'd come. Dr. Romero spotted him instantly and walked over. "Glad you're here," she said. "You're going to fit in just fine." Cameron looked around the room. There were raised eyebrows, curious stares, doubt, but none of it mattered, because he hadn't come to fit in. He'd come to stand out. Cameron's first week in the National Math Scholars Program hit like a tidal wave. The classes moved fast, the students talked faster, and the material was beyond anything he'd ever seen. These weren't the kinds of equations you could solve in a few lines. This was abstract theory, logic models, statistical anomalies. Most of the students had already been trained for this pace. Private tutors, advanced summer camps, custom-designed prep programs. Cameron had a supply closet and a pile of used textbooks. But he wasn't intimidated. He was used to being behind. He was used to being doubted. And he was used to proving people wrong. Still, it wasn't easy. On the second day, a professor handed back a pop quiz, and Cameron saw a bold red C across the top. His first reaction wasn't panic, it was fire. He didn't belong here? Fine. He'd worked twice as hard until no one could deny that he did. At night, while his dorm mates watched movies or ordered takeout, Cameron locked himself in the library. He printed problem sets and scribbled formulas on whiteboards. He made flashcards. He asked questions after class, even when other students rolled their eyes or muttered under their breath. He didn't care. This wasn't about being liked. It was about staying in the room. One evening, after a brutal lecture on non-Euclidean geometry, Cameron stayed behind to review the notes. As he packed up, he noticed two students whispering near the door. "He's trying too hard," one said. "Always got something to prove," the other replied. They didn't think he heard, but he did. Cameron didn't confront them. He didn't snap back. He just worked harder. Every night, he got a little sharper. Every morning, he walked into class, a little stronger. Then came the team challenge. It was an intense 2-day group project, where students were randomly paired and given a complex real-world problem to solve. Cameron was assigned to a group with 3 others, 2 from elite prep schools in New York and a girl from Palo Alto who had interned at a tech company over the summer. From the beginning, it was clear they didn't see him as equal. They split the tasks without asking, gave him the simplest sections, and mostly ignored his suggestions. When he pointed out a flaw in their algorithm, one of them smirked and said, "Thanks, but we've got it covered." Cameron didn't argue. He let them keep going. But that night, he ran their calculations himself and found they were way off. He stayed up until 3 a.m., reworking the entire model, documenting every step and preparing a clear presentation that tied everything together. On presentation day, his group was confident. They breezed through the slides until the judges started asking technical questions they couldn't answer. Confused glances flew around. Awkward pauses filled the air. Then Cameron stepped forward. He calmly explained the corrected model, walked through the error margins, and addressed every question with clarity. The judges nodded. One of them even raised an eyebrow. When the presentation ended, his teammates avoided eye contact. As the teams filed out of the lecture hall, Dr. Romero caught up with Cameron. "That was impressive," she said. "You carried that team." Cameron shrugged. "I just wanted to get it right. That's what leaders do." Later that night, his group's final score was posted. They'd placed first. His name, once an afterthought on the roster, was now being talked about in lounges and study groups. Students who hadn't noticed him before now asked for his input. One of the teammates even apologized, saying, "I noticed, David, you won't happen again." Cameron nodded. He didn't need the apology, but it meant something. It meant they were finally seeing him. Not as the poor kid, not as the outsider, but as someone who deserved to be there because of his mind, his work ethic, and his resilience. He called his mom that night, voice low but proud. "They're starting to notice," he said. "Good," she replied, "because you've always been worth noticing." Cameron leaned back in his chair, looking out the dorm window at the stars above the city skyline. He wasn't finished. Not even close. A year later, Cameron Brooks walked through the halls of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology like he belonged there. Because now, he did. The first time he stepped onto the MIT campus, he'd felt like a tourist. Everything was bigger, faster, harder. The professors were world-renowned. The labs looked like something out of a sci movie, and his classmates included math Olympians, published researchers, and tech prodigies. It was easy to feel small, but Cameron didn't shrink. He just got to work. He had come too far to stop now. From day one, he sat in the front row, asked the tough questions, and stayed late in office hours. He joined research groups, took on extra credit, and spent weekends in the math lab solving problems no one else volunteered to touch. His dorm was small, his schedule insane, and his sleep inconsistent, but he was thriving. Still, some things hadn't changed. There were still professors who overlooked him at first, assuming he was a student aide rather than one of their brightest scholars. There were classmates who were surprised when he led team projects or aced the hardest exams. Even in the most elite spaces, Cameron felt the weight of quiet expectations that someone like him was still an exception, not the norm. One afternoon, during an advanced number theory seminar, Cameron raised a question that challenged the entire premise of the professor's argument. The room went silent. A few students chuckled under their breath. But the professor paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "That's actually a brilliant point." The laughter stopped. After class, a student approached him. "Jason from Franklin High." "You're still making the rest of us look bad," Jason said with a grin. Cameron smiled back. "You just weren't paying attention before?" They laughed. It felt good, natural. A moment of full-circle clarity. The kid who once sat silently in the back row was now rewriting what excellence looked like in rooms where brilliance had long been defined by Britas. Despite the growing respect, Cameron never forgot who he was or where he came from. He still called his mom every Sunday, sometimes during a study break, sometimes while walking home from the lab. She always asked if he was eating enough and reminded him to sleep, then reminded him that she was proud. He didn't need the reminder, but he loved hearing it. Near the end of his sophomore year, Cameron was invited to speak at a conference for underrepresented youth in STEM. He stood behind the podium, wearing the same striped shirt from Franklin High, his voice calm but clear. "They didn't expect me to be here," he told the audience. "Not my old school, not some of my professors, not even some of you, but I'm here. And the truth is, brilliance doesn't come from zip codes or family income. It comes from resilience. It comes from believing in yourself when nobody else does." The room erupted in applause. After the speech, a young boy around 13 walked up to him, wide-eyed and clutching a notebook. "Do you think someone like me could get into MIT too?" he asked. Cameron looked him in the eyes. "You already belong," he said. "Now go prove it." Later that night, Cameron returned to his dorm and opened the window. The city lights glittered beyond the campus, and a soft breeze carried the sound of passing cars. He sat down at his desk, surrounded by problem sets, textbooks, and half-drunk cups of coffee. But he didn't feel tired. He felt alive. Because he had done more than just succeed. He had redefined what success looked like. He had turned doubt into drive, silence into strength, and rejection into purpose. And somewhere, back at Franklin High, in a dusty classroom, with a chalkboard that once tried to humiliate him, his story was still echoing. Not just as a lesson in math, but as a lesson in never letting the world write your worth. Cameron Brooks had not just solved equations. He had solved himself. The world won't always see your worth. But that doesn't mean you stop showing up. That's the lesson Cameron Brooks teaches us. His story reminds us that brilliance isn't a privilege, it's a birthright for those willing to fight for it. Like Maya Angelou once said, You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. In classrooms, boardrooms, and even janitor closets, the truth is the same. Your voice matters. Your mind matters. You matter. And if life hands you a locked door, don't wait. Build your own key. If Cameron's journey stirred something in you, don't keep it quiet. Drop a comment and share your story, because someone out there needs to hear it. Like this video, hit that subscribe button, and join our community. This isn't just a channel. This is where stories like yours are seen, heard, and remembered.